Hi, my friends. Some words of Torah for Parshas Shelach. Israel will be holding new election shortly, and it appears as if there will soon be a new prime minister, Naftali Bennett. All of this political repositioning draws my eye to our Parsha, which also contains political restructuring for the Jewish nation, as I hope to explain. Firstly, let's note that immediately after the sin of the spies is narrated in our Parsha, the Torah presents Bnei Yisrael with two mitzvot that they can only put into practice once they enter the land of Israel. While this was meant to be a consolation to the people, reassuring them that they would indeed eventually enter the land, let's note an interesting switch in verbiage. The first mitzvah is the mitzvah of nisachim, of libations. It states that upon entry into Eretz Yisrael, whenever an individual Jew wishes to bring a voluntary animal korban, he or she must provide flour, oil, and wine as accompaniments to the animal sacrifice. The mitzvah is introduced by Hashem telling them, Ki tavo'u el eretz moshavotechem, asher ani notein lachem. When you come into the land of your inheritance, which I am giving to you. The second mitzvah is the mitzvah of taking challah. Many of us are familiar with this. It requires one to tithe their dough and present a portion to the Kohen, but only after the flour and water have been mixed into a homogeneous mass of dough. That mitzvah is introduced with slightly different words. Bevo'achem el haaretz asher ani mevi etchem shama. When you come into the land in which I am bringing you. Why is the verb giving used above with the mitzvah of nisachim, whereas the verb bringing is used here for the mitzvah of challah? Furthermore, let's note that in detailing the mitzvah of nisachim, of libations, the Torah is very verbose in making sure that every single person is treated with the same standard. Hakahal, chuka achat, the congregation shall maintain one law for you and the stranger. There shall eternally be one law, as you and the stranger are the same before Hashem. There shall be one Torah and one mishpat, one judgment for you and the stranger who lives with you. Why all of this emphasis on equality for all of Eretz Yisrael's citizens, specifically for this mitzvah of the libations? What was one of the largest contributing factors to the Jewish people sinning by accepting the report of the spies? If we look with a discerning eye, we'll discover that it was a worldview that many Jews in the desert harbored, that they were just commoners by comparison to the higher echelons in their class-based society. That is, the common man on the street invested too heavily in the opinions of the higher ups in society and didn't think that their opinions counted for anything. Our clue for this is a very terse statement by Rashi, who notes a shift in language in the story of the spies. In describing the Jewish people throughout the narrative, the words Am, Edah, and Kahal are used interchangeably. They all mean, in a sense, the people or the congregation. But it's seemingly arbitrary in the way that these words are interchanged. But in one instance, the Torah states that the Edah, upon hearing the report of the spies, started to cry loudly. Rashi notes that the word Edah in this first pasuk of chapter 14 doesn't simply mean the people, but rather means specifically the community leaders, the heads of the Sanhedrin. The reason why they cried so loudly, amplifying their voices, is because they wanted to demonstrate to the common folk who looked to them for guidance that this was a calamitous event and that they should follow their example and cry in suit. At this point in their evolution, this nation of former slaves hadn't yet found any sense of independent thought or of being able to think critically for themselves. So when they saw the Sanhedrin leaders crying, they assumed that their only option was to go along with them. And that is why when Moshe and Aharon wished to appeal to the people, the Torah writes in verse 5 that they fell on their faces in front of the kahal, the entire population of common folk, and not in front of the community leaders. They wanted to demonstrate that there is power to the people, that you need not follow the bad example of your leaders, but instead can make your own decisions. If you will, this was a preliminary lesson in democracy. One person, one vote. But sadly, it was too late for that. The mindset of the people at that point was too indoctrinated into blindly following their leaders. And that's why Hashem wisely pronounced that only a new generation of people would be able to inherit the land. a generation that would have that blind loyalty to its leaders uprooted from them. In preparing the people for their new democratic society in Eretz Yisrael, Hashem wished to demonstrate that each and every person counts and has a voice. And that's why the mitzvah of libations comes first, since it is what accompanies a private person's volitional choice to express his or her individuality and bring a korban on their own, even when they're not required to. You have a voice. You can express your devotion to Hashem independently of others. Furthermore, and here's where the emphasis on the stranger or the convert comes in, everyone is treated with equality. Each resident of Eretz Yisrael shall have the same law of independence applied to him or her. And that's in contrast with the second commandment, that of the mitzvah of challah. Note how the tithe can only be performed after all the individual granules of flour are consolidated into one homogeneous mass. This was a cue to the Jewish people that despite the fact that you are each individuals with individual rights, you must also remember that united we stand, and that our holiness comes from that Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, from the many one. Yes, you can bring your individual korban, but also remember to remain united as one people within your democracy. Never allow your individual voice to drown out the more important voice of the collective. So this explains the difference in verbiage when introducing these two mitzvot. When introducing a mitzvah that highlights the individual, the mitzvah of nesachim for an individual korban, Hashem says that he is giving each and every one of us a portion of the land as a gift to do with as we please. But when highlighting the collective, the mitzvah of challah, Hashem underscores that he is merely bringing us to the land which belongs not to each of us, but rather to the collective. And no one should feel any rights of absolute ownership or independence. Yes, Israel today is going through some interesting changes in its political leadership. There is much to be optimistic about, despite the prospect that we may be losing one of the most powerful and effective prime ministers that Israel has ever had, Bibi Netanyahu. In this new government, the presumptive new prime minister will be a Shomer Shabbos Jew who dons tefillin daily. The new government will be comprised of a coalition of rightists, leftists, Jews, and Arabs. That's something to be proud of, especially in light of all the unfair and utterly false criticism that Israel has been barraged with on the world stage as being an apartheid nation. Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East where each voice counts and each citizen gets an equal vote. This certainly seems to be what the Torah had in mind for a system of government. It is also a government that is rooted in Jewish values, and the only country in the world where a Jew doesn't have to worry about taking time off for Shabbos and Yom Tov, since they are celebrated as national holidays. So much good is happening in Israel today. I am truly frightened for all my brethren who publicly criticize Israel and raise their voices with bitter cries against her. I would beseech them to read the Parsha carefully and discover what happened to the spies who besmirched the good character of the land and its inhabitants. Let's always look at this bright beacon that shines from our homeland with great pride and affection until we too are able to be called citizens of Israel. And let's hope that happens, my friends. B'meher. Wishing you a beautiful Shabbos. Let's all be thinking with dreams of our future about the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, Artseinu HaKedosha. Shabbat Shalom.